Years ago, he became an adjunct professor of film at USC, teaching a graduate course. His students were some of today's top filmmakers: Jaws director Steven Spielberg and Star Wars director George Lucas. By 1970, a new crop of filmmakers was changing the look and style of film. Jerry was out of step with the times, and for 10 years, he was not to make another film in Hollywood. But in European countries, particularly France, Jerry's phenomenal popularity never waned. Crowds surround him wherever he goes, and his every move is chronicled in newspapers and magazines. Even Sir Savillon, who dubs Jerry's voice into French, has become a celebrity in his own right.
Je suis un peu déçu. Je voulais vous emmener dîner tous, mais CB a décidé un meeting auquel tout le personnel doit assister. Alors il faut que je reste. À bientôt.
Salut les petites crapules.
In America, Jerry still continues to pack them in when he plays Las Vegas. But his business ventures, like the chain of Jerry Lewis Cinemas, were a disaster. Today he faces a $3 million civil suit from his investors. During his absence from the screen, he had personal problems too. His 36-year marriage to Patty fell apart. The couple separated 2 years ago, but Jerry refuses to discuss the divorce or settlement. Perhaps his greatest problem was his addiction to a pain-killing drug. He was treated by Dr. Michael DeBakey.
And I was up to 13 Percodan a day in 1978, until I got to a point where I didn't know where I was coming from. I didn't know what I was doing. Dr. DeBakey, who was taking care of me, and his entire team at the Texas Medical Center, Methodist Hospital rather, they couldn't believe I was surviving. They couldn't understand how I functioned, how I talked, breathed, got on an airplane, did a telethon. I had no idea how it happened.
With the help of Dr. DeBakey, Jerry kicked the Percodan habit, but there were moments when he says it was too much to bear. Perhaps this is best understood by singer Tony Orlando, who shared a similar problem.
Jerry came to my dressing room with his mother the other night, and we were talking about his days with Percodan and how at one moment in time he was in his bathroom, he looked in the mirror, and he had a gun, and as he had it to his head, he heard his children in the hall, and that was that. Put it down when he heard their voices out there.
Jerry Lewis!
But Jerry Lewis, despite his own massive problems, is perhaps best known for his work on behalf of muscular dystrophy. He has raised the astonishing total of $215 million with his Labor Day telethons. For 16 years, Jerry has entertained, wheedled, cajoled, and cried. This year, on his 55th birthday, he was honored by President Reagan for his humanitarian dedication. But it is as a clown that most of us know Jerry Lewis. The clown is his alter ego and trademark. He lives virtually surrounded by images of clowns of all kinds. They crowd his tables and fill his walls. And it is as a clown that Jerry Lewis begins and ends his most recent film.
A clown is someone who has something to say and something to do, and his heart doesn't have the courage, and he has to hide. Even though, through the disguise, what he's doing is accepted, it indeed would not be accepted without the disguise. The clown is possibly the saddest, most devastated individual that we've ever known. When he takes the makeup off, he's been half nurtured, so he's half a man. He's half satisfied, he's half fulfilled. I can't even talk about it without it shattering me for him. I'm equally as shattered emotionally thinking about him as I am when I think about Jerry when he was 4 or 5. That lonely child finding that through humor he'd get through his life. So the constant frustration and the constant inability to know fulfillment is how they spend their lives. So whenever I can put on the clown makeup, I too can steal some wonderful moments behind that disguise. And it makes me feel like a better man when I'm doing it.
Yes, sir. The package will be on your desk tomorrow, and I say that with the utmost confidence. I will take care of it. How will I take care of it? I don't know how I'm going to take care of it if I know how
When
to
it
take
comes
care
to sending a package somewhere overnight, most forceful executives become as helpless as a 2-year-old.
You'll take care of it?
And as a secretary, you have to take care of them.
How will you take care of it? How do you
Just call Federal Express.
Oh.
Federal Express, when it absolutely positively has to be there overnight.
Hamer Reinhardt, international terrorist. Deke De Silva, New York City cop. One man can bring the world to its knees, and only one man can stop him. Universal Pictures presents Sylvester Stallone in Nighthawks.
Look out!
Nighthawks, rated R. Starts Friday at a theater near you.
10 tough mean beards versus one Bic shaver. Can one Bic shave them all?
I'm gonna bring this Bic to its knees. It's this Bic versus barbed wire. After my beard, that Bic's gonna need a stretcher.
It's amazing. It looks like one Bic shaver is going to shave these 10 tough beards.
Hey, they gave me a great shave.
Yeah, big shave of 10, jocks nothing.
Yes, one Bic shaved these 10 tough beards. How many shaves can you get?
If you're considering a Ford Fairmont, here's a better idea. Dodge Aries K, with better mileage and more passenger seating standard, plus the great traction of front-wheel drive for less money. Just compare. Here's the Fairmont's mileage. Now here's the Aries. Quite an improvement. Fairmont seats 5, Aries seats 6. And when it comes to base sticker prices, Aries is less. Which is the better idea? Dodge Aries K.
Test drive Aries. Compare qualifying competitive cars. We're so confident you'll get $50 no matter which car you buy.
One of the most important gymnastics events. And special performances by dazzling world and American champions. Celebrate our 20-year tradition of excellence Saturday on ABC's Wide World of Sports.
The biggest customer for the space shuttle so far is the Pentagon. ABC News Nightline will examine the military uses of the shuttle tonight, 11:30, 10:30 Central. Well, that's 2020 for tonight. Tomorrow and over the weekend, I'll be here with the ABC News team, Frank Reynolds, Max Robinson, and Jules Bergman, for the launch and return of the Space Shuttle Columbia. We're in touch, so you be in touch. I'm Hugh Downs. Good night.
Tomorrow, Benson has a madcap mystery on his hands when vandals cause chaos in the mansion. Then, Diana might get hung out to dry when she goes undercover in a dry cleaners to wipe out a protection racket on I'm a Big Girl Now. After, when Johnny and Eva met, it was the beginning of Crazy Times, the Friday night movie. This has been the ABC News Magazine 2020.
The Space Shuttle Columbia embarks on its maiden voyage tomorrow. Join Frank Reynolds from Cape Canaveral, along with Max Robinson at Mission Control in Houston for live coverage beginning at 6 a.m. Eastern. Stay with ABC News throughout the day for special reports.
This is News 4 New York. With Chuck Scarborough and Sue Simmons.
Good evening. It's T-minus 7 hours and 50 minutes and counting.
7 hours and 50 minutes until the dawn of a new era in American space exploration. It's so far so good now in the countdown for the long-delayed launch of the first space shuttle, the most complicated vehicle of any kind ever built. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen practiced landings today in a specially equipped executive jet over the Cape Canaveral airstrip, just in case something goes wrong and they have to bring the shuttle back in for an emergency landing. But launch officials exuded nothing but optimism today.
whole launch team feels real good about the operation where we stand now.
If all goes as planned, at 6:50 tomorrow morning, the Space Shuttle Columbia will blast off its own liquid-fueled engines aided by 2 solid-fuel boosters. And then 2 minutes and 12 seconds into its flight, the solid-fuel boosters will be jettisoned and retrieved. The next critical phase comes when the huge external fuel tank is jettisoned. It's the only component of the shuttle system that is not reusable. Columbia will orbit the Earth 36 times in just over 2 days. That's 54.5 hours to be exact. And then it will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and glide to a landing. That is the flight plan. Frank Field is among the thousands gathered to witness tomorrow's spectacle.
This is the transporter. Not too long ago, it carried the space shuttle to launch pad 39A. Each one of those links on the tractor weighs 1 ton, and it takes 3 men to drive it. The transporter is the size of the infield of a baseball diamond. It's moving at about 1 mile per hour, and it seems at that rate, that's about how long it's taken to get the space shuttle in action. But the Columbia stands poised, ready for launch. The problems encountered with the heat shield, the tiles, the engines, the fuel cells, and all the wiring, it's all now past. Still, there's always concern.
Yes, there are uncertainties. It's been 7 years since we launched a manned vehicle. We've been through this test before. We did the same thing on the flight readiness firing. We activated all these systems, all except the ones that fire the solid rockets. So some of the technical uncertainties are worked out, but we think it's going to go. I think everyone here thinks it's going to go.
One of the uncertainties is weather. These are stratocumulus clouds. Clouds and winds also affect the launch. And if there's a 5/10 cloud coverage directly over the launch site, 39A, that might cause a delay. Another uncertainty. On that space transportation system, Friday morning will ride the hopes of the nation's future in civilian, military, and commercial space efforts. At the Kennedy Space Center, Frank Field, News 4 New York.
Well, President Reagan sent a message of praise to the shuttle pilots today, saying, "Through you today, we all feel as giants. Once again, we feel the pride that comes from knowing we are the first and we are the best. And we are so because we are free," unquote.
Well, as Frank told us, tomorrow's weather is critical for the shuttle launch. Cliff Morrison is here now with the latest weather update. Cliff?
That's right. Weather tomorrow is going to be fairly good. There is only one large weather maker across our nation, and that is a large system, showers and thunder showers. But as you can see, it's really well northwest of this whole state of Florida. And down there, they're going to have conditions for takeoff time about 6:50 in the morning, something like this. It's going to be partly cloudy to clear, and we're looking for temperatures to be about 63 degrees. Now, Frank had mentioned some ground fog. The skies look good. The winds are going to be from the east around 10 miles an hour. The dew point is that point, the temperature.
What I'd like to do is go over and stick a match under it and run like the dickens.
Here at the Kennedy Space Center, the countdown continues. It will be launch before breakfast. For Channel 7 Eyewitness News, I'm Roger Grimsby.
Well, all systems are go for tomorrow's historic shuttle launch, but what about the weather? Will conditions at Cape Canaveral be right for the blast-off? Let's go to Storm Field. He's got more on that now. Storm?
Okay, right, Ellen. As a matter of fact, there are certain conditions that have to be met for that shuttle to take off. Number one, there can be no more than sky being covered by 5/10. It's a very small amount of cloud cover, although high clouds are okay. The visibility has to be greater than or equal to 7 miles. And the winds at this point have to be...
2 men who will pilot the first shuttle ever to leave the face of the earth say, "We are ready." From his hospital bed in Washington, President Reagan sent his wishes for a safe journey and added, "You go forward this morning on a..."
The prime of your life visits an 80-year-old artist and her self-portrait, Saturday at 7.
The Tonight Show and The Tomorrow Show will each begin 1/2 hour later, so that we may bring you the following NBC News Special Report. From the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida, NBC News covers the flight of Columbia. The shuttle begins. Here is NBC News correspondent John Chancellor.
That is the spaceship Columbia on the launching pad at this hour, and its huge external fuel tank is being filled with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, a tricky and dangerous task. Good evening. Everything has gone well here all day at the Kennedy Space Center. The countdown has proceeded smoothly, and the technicians at one time were ahead of schedule. The launch is expected to take place on schedule at 10 minutes before 7 in the morning Eastern Time. The only variable at the moment is the weather, and at this hour it's a perfect evening here at the Cape, but conditions here can change very quickly. What would be a problem would be too much cloud cover or too much wind. If the mission got into trouble after launch, the astronauts would have to land here, and tail or crosswinds could endanger that landing. But so far, no problem. And with more on the weather, here is Frank Field at the Cape Canaveral Weather Station.
John, the radar at the Cape Canaveral Weather Station shows no adverse weather within quite a range. In fact, the cold front that was moving this way with its scattered showers has become stationary well to the north of us. How much of a range do we cover, Sergeant?
We're covering 200 nautical miles, Frank, and there's no precipitation echoes within this area.
So within 200 miles around the Cape, there's no adverse weather. In addition to that, there are 14 wind stations around the Cape that show favorable conditions. There is also a lightning detection system that we're watching very closely. And furthermore, the satellite photographs continue to come in regularly, and they show good weather conditions around the globe. Here at the Cape itself, the weather remains good. Also at the primary landing site at Edwards Air Force Base, the weather there, too, remains good. And the backup site, Northrop Strip, White Sands, while the winds are a little gusty there, too, the weather is good. So the weather, John, is a go.
Thank you, Frank. This is a model of the whole shuttle configuration. That's the shuttle itself, and these are the fuel tanks which will send it into space. These two things that look like skyrockets here actually are. They're solid fuel boosters that will jump everything off the pad. They will be jettisoned into the mission, 2 minutes into the mission, and recovered by parachute. Nothing this large in a solid-fueled rocket has ever been sent into space before. Now, this behemoth of a fuel tank here is being filled now with liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, and that fuel flows into the shuttle itself and powers these engines, which will also help to get it off the pad and into orbit. And once it gets up, this will be jettisoned and will burn up over the Indian Ocean. The shuttle itself, incidentally, is a spaceship now, but when it comes down in California, it becomes a glider with no power at all. It will drop like a stone and land, on schedule, we hope, at Edwards Air Force Base. That's the shuttle. And that's the story of the outside of it. Sandy Gilmore picks up the story of what goes on inside, and he reports from Houston.
This is a very accurate reproduction of the cockpit of the spaceship Columbia. We have reproduced it for you here at NBC in order to bring in experts to explain every detail of the astronauts' flight. Everything has been reproduced here, including hundreds of knobs, dials, switches, and warning lights, which will tell the astronauts exactly what is going on throughout the spaceship. For example, on the front panel here, 3 television cathode ray tubes which display computer flight information. There are 5 computers aboard the Columbia, 1 computer to keep track of the other 4. We have also reproduced some of the manual flight controls that the astronauts will use to land here on Earth. For example, the stick, similar to a stick used to control a military fighter aircraft. And there is also a speed control lever aboard that the astronauts will use to slow the Columbia down prior to landing. The Columbia is the most complex flying machine ever built, and with this simulator, we will show you every detail of the astronauts' operation of it. Sandy Gilmore, NBC News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
As for the astronauts themselves, it's a veteran and a rookie. The veteran is John Young. He is 50 years old and has been an astronaut for 19 years, and this will be his 5th flight into space. He's been in space as part of the Gemini and Apollo programs, and he has been to the moon as a member of the crew of Apollo 16. The rookie is Robert Crippen, who is 43 years old, and this will be his first time in space, hence the tag of rookie, even though he's been an astronaut for 12 years. Crippen was a member of the support teams for the Skylab flights in the Soyuz Apollo mission, and as the saying goes, Mr. Crippen has paid his dues in the space program. So as preparations continue, we see things about the flight of Columbia that are routine and some that are not. There have been problems with the tiles. They must withstand the buildup of heat during re-entry. And there have been problems with the propulsion system, which must lift the vehicle and its fuel tanks off the pad. We'll have that part of the story in a moment.
On the magazine, your passport to the future. Venture with us into the uncharted frontiers of mind and space, intellect and imagination. Look beyond the technological potential of today's science as we search for new worlds, new meanings, new dimensions. Omni, the multi-award-winning magazine of science, fact, and fiction. The very first of its kind. Omni, the magazine of tomorrow, on sale today.
Polaroid introduces the new Made for Each Other pack.
What's made for each other?
The Time Zero One-Step and Time Zero Super Color Film, the world's simplest camera and fastest developing color film. They are made for each other. And you see this color in seconds now, not minutes.
Look at that.
Well, that's why they put the film and camera together in this new Made for Each Other pack.
What if you want more film?
Oh, buy another camera.
You're kidding.
It was worth a try.
Oh.
Mom's incredible. She has arthritis, but insists on making the family breakfast, even when her arthritis is acting up. Some mornings when she got up, she'd take aspirin, but she's more careful to use Bufferin now. Aspirin sometimes upset her stomach, but Bufferin adds protection ingredients. Bayer and Anacin don't. Bufferin relieves her minor pain and its stiffness fast.
Morning, Grandma.
And it works for hours. Thank goodness Mom's more careful to use Bufferin now.
There's one unique aspect about the flight of the space shuttle. Unlike the procedures followed in the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, the space shuttle will take off without having gone through any unmanned flight testing, and that is a first. There have also been setbacks involving key mechanisms in liftoff and re-entry.
There were two serious engineering problems in the development of the shuttle: the propulsion system, which puts the orbiter in space, and the heat tiles, which protect the orbiter during re-entry. These two problems not only delayed the project, they remain a large question mark since neither system has ever been tested in actual flight. First, propulsion. These new rocket engines were designed to be reusable, unlike the old rockets, which went up once and then burnt out on re-entry. NASA made animated movies showing how easily the yet-to-be-developed rocket engines would furnish a thrust of 375,000 pounds for liftoff and could be used for at least 55 missions, and how other rocket boosters would be recovered and used over and over again. The actual development of the rocket engines was started in 1971 and went well for several years. NASA then decided, for economic reasons, to eliminate the expensive testing of each engined component part separately. Instead, they went right on to assemble everything into a completed engine, and then scheduled static firing tests. This procedure was unorthodox. If the smallest part malfunctioned, the entire engine could be damaged and would have to be rebuilt from the start. And there were malfunctions. At least 5 major fires were caused when engines were tested. Engines were destroyed, as well as important shuttle facilities. There were long delays in rebuilding the engines damaged or burnt in testing. But now, many billions of dollars and a few years later than planned, the engines appear ready for liftoff. The second big problem has been heat tiles, or thermal systems. NASA developed a special material which could withstand the 3,000-degree heat of re-entry and still be reusable for many missions. It is cut in blocks and glued to the orbiter surface. Each tile is unique. Every single one is precision machined to match the contour of the area it covers. 31,000 tiles were required to cover the orbiter. Work was started on the tiles installation in California in 1977. 2 years later, with only part of the installation completed, the orbiter was moved to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Many tiles were broken in transit. The rest of the installation had to be completed at the Space Center, a slow, time-consuming job. About 27,000 tiles had to be refitted. Measurements were taken at the Space Center in Florida and sent to a factory in California, where the tiles were machined to specifications and shipped back to Florida. Each tile separately tested. It took one person 3 weeks to install 4 tiles. The tile installations have been expensive and very time-consuming, but these 1-inch thick heat-resistant tiles are the only protection against the orbiter burning up on re-entry for the Earth landing.
The tiles have never been tested in a launch or re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and neither has the propulsion system. And what of the astronauts, considering these problems and delays, plus the absence of unmanned testing? Is it their feeling that this flight is more dangerous than previous space missions? The question was asked of both by Tom Brokaw during a recent interview.
Look, a part of this mission that is getting a great deal of attention before you go up is the fact that it is not flight tested for the first time. Are you aware of all that attention that's being written about, and we're talking about it on the air and so on, and does it affect your attitude in any way? Bob?
Well, we've been asked that question quite a few times by the press, and it was John and my opinion that the cheapest way to do this thing was to put men in it, and because they offer a better chance of success. We can think and be prepared to handle situations that you couldn't program an automatic system to be able to handle. And we claim to be test pilots, so that's part of our job. We think it's the right way to go fly.
But it's been ground tested enormously, just like we tested all the unmanned vehicles that we flew in Gemini and Apollo. And of course, if we had flown those unmanned vehicles in Gemini and Apollo with men in them, they would have been just as successful as the unmanned tests were, wouldn't it?
Are you getting tired of the question?
No, it's a good question, and you know, there's some thought in asking the question. But what I'm saying, if you go back and look at the other programs, we could have flown those men just as easily. Nobody would have permitted it, but we could have done it.
In your quieter moments, do members of your family or your friends say, "Hey, come on, John, you're bound to be nervous about this since it hasn't been flight tested"?
I'm a little nervous about it publicly, yeah. I don't mind saying that. If you climb on top of a rocket space plane like this one, a space ship that's as big as this one, that's loaded with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and has two large solid rocket motors alongside of it, and you aren't just a little apprehensive, you don't understand the problem. And, you know, that's normal. I've been that way for every space flight, and I don't think this will be an exception.
That's normal. He's right. Columbia was a long time getting here tonight. The development of the space shuttle has been slowed almost from the start, and that has made the program more expensive than originally thought. We'll have that story in a moment.
Hi, who's your friend? Hey, what if I take your picture? You want to smile? You don't. You're pretty anyway. You see how fast the color comes in? That's Polaroid's new Time Zero, the world's fastest developing color film. So you come back anytime, we'll have another big day just like this.
I'm Arthur C. Clarke, speaking for Omni Magazine. On the first day of January 2001, the second millennium ends and the third begins. What kind of world will greet that first day of the new era? It's the world of Omni Magazine. From the creation of new life forms to the conquest of the stars, Omni focuses upon the ultimate frontier towards which man must inevitably direct the infinite resources of his mind.
Time now. Action. Creation of a new personal sport coupe. Ford EXP. The bringing together of you and a beautiful package of world-class technologies with front-wheel drive, four-wheel independent suspension, a shape that slices the wind, and built with Ford's commitment to quality. Tomorrow is here. The 1982 EXP from the world of Ford.
The space shuttle that is scheduled to be launched from here tomorrow is not the one they first had in mind. There have been a number of design changes and modifications. NASA once thought the shuttle would be ready to fly in 1979, but those delicate and troublesome tiles we saw have accounted for much of the time lost. As a result, what began as a $5 billion project has now become about 30% more expensive, and there are still people asking if the shuttle really is necessary. Robert Hager reports on these cost overruns and what caused them.
After the moonwalk success and with thousands of jobs at stake, NASA needed another big project. Officials there came up with a reusable shuttle idea. NASA estimated it would cost about $10 billion. It got the go-ahead, but for only $5.15 billion. So NASA redesigned the shuttle, cut out expensive testing, made more revisions for military needs, and still promised Congress this compromise shuttle would be ready to fly by 1980. It promised too much. It meant attempting a completely new space project with almost no margin for error. With hundreds of subcontractors, there were mistakes and delays. NASA's economy budget allowed for only a couple of backup engines. When they blew up, scheduling went way off. Waiting for new engine parts to be built cost the program over $7 million a day. The refitting of the 33,000 heat-resistant tiles caused more expensive delays. NASA admitted it might not be getting the best value for the money spent.
The ways we had for counting money were excellent. The ways we had for counting effort were not so good. So sometimes you could be quite sure how much money you'd spent, but it was more difficult to tell whether you had accomplished all of what you should have accomplished for that money.
Congress's answer to all this was to spend more money on the project, a $220 million supplement in 1978, and another $185 million. In January 1981, another $300 million extra for the shuttle. Opponents of the shuttle can only see the costs going higher and higher.
Or that it was going to cost more, in my judgment, more than the moonshot cost. The moonshot was less than $25 billion. This is going to be in that neighborhood.
Worth it? Well, that question may be easier to answer when we find out if the space shuttle performs the way officials here hope it does. Robert Hager, NBC News, at NASA headquarters in Washington.
If the space shuttle is to pay off in the future, it will have to deliver cargo into space. Clients would pay $35 million for rental of the entire cargo bay on one trip, or as little as $3,000 for a 60-pound experiment package. And while the cargo bay will be empty on this flight, it does have an important role on this flight. If the doors don't open and shut correctly, this shuttle will be forced to come back to Earth ahead of schedule, and the shuttle program will be set back again. Roy Neal took a walk in the cargo bay simulator at the Johnson Space Center.
The Space Shuttle orbiter, the Columbia, is big. It's 122 feet long, and its wings span 78 feet. But the biggest thing about the Columbia is its payload bay, or cargo hold, if you wish. That's 65 feet long and 15 feet across. It can carry 65,000 pounds. It's about the same size as one of those 18-wheel trucks that you see tooling along the highway. It carries enough that it could launch 5 unmanned satellites at a future date from orbit. Or it can hold a space laboratory, complete with 3 scientists for up to 30 days. And much like a trailer park, the payload bay comes complete with hookups for electricity, water, and air. This is a mock-up, used as a simulator at the Johnson Space Center, but it's full size. You may notice that the payload bay doors are open. That's the way they will be in space. Must be, as a matter of fact, for inside those doors are radiators, and that's how the spacecraft is cooled. If the payload bay doors were not to open, the spacecraft would be forced to come back to Earth. This Rockwell Company animation shows in quick time how the doors open and close. If all goes well, we expect to see part of that operation on live television. First, the right-hand door will be unlatched, and then the left. Both astronauts are involved. Crippen running the computer which actually operates the doors. Young working the TV cameras which will tell Crippen and Mission Control whether the doors are latching and unlatching properly. Assuming that everything works, a big hurdle will have been passed. The radiators will cool the spacecraft, and the mission can continue past 5 orbits, which is about as far as the shuttle can go if those radiators don't function. The doors will stay open until a few hours before the shuttle heads for home. Then, once again, the astronauts will use the onboard television system to make sure that the doors are closed snugly and that the latches are secured. The radiators won't work anymore after that. The shuttle will be cooled by the water it has on board until it lands back on Earth.
NASA has made a number of claims about the shuttle's long-range capabilities, and some of these claims ought to be explained. For example, NASA once predicted a 2-week turnaround for each orbiter. Right now, that is impossible, and some people say it's more likely that 3 or 4 months will be taken to service the vehicle between flights. Then there's the question of repair and recovery of satellites. The expensive satellites used for communication, and some of them cost as much as $75 million, orbit at 22,000 miles. That is out of range of the shuttle. Some satellites in low Earth orbit are within range of the shuttle, but they are used for tasks like navigation, mapping, and environmental protection. Presumably, a shuttle crew could recover or repair one of those. But many of our satellites are just out of range of the space shuttle. We'll be back with more in a moment.
Outside, the Canon NP200 may look like any small copier, but inside there's a world of difference, a world of micronics, where 20 copies a minute are not only possible, but made reliable with a microcomputer. Fiber optics precisely defines your image, and a toner projection system gives you clear copies on virtually any paper. Up to 11 by 17, compact in size and price, the Canon NP200 is definitely worth looking into.
There's a hungry kind of feeling, and every day it grows. You know there's so much more to you than anybody knows.
Specialist Kevin Crowley is working with tomorrow's technology in the Army's newest tank.
The laser determines target range and feeds it to the computer. It's just incredible.
Tonight, as the Space Shuttle Columbia sits on its launching pad, there are people who hope that we're about to start a new era in space travel. And if that takes place, the future owes a certain debt to the past, to those little Redstone rockets that went off from here many years ago and the tiny Mercury capsules, a debt as well to the 7 original astronauts who proved that space flight, manned flight, was possible, to others, and to Armstrong, Aldrin, Collins, and their colleagues who walked on the moon. The mementos and trophies of these last 20 years are on display here at the Cape. The Space Center is one of the most popular tourist attractions in the country. All kinds of people have come here to look at that. Still, some of these artifacts of the past in space are going to seed here, and some say that Pompeii is better preserved. That's unfortunate because no matter what lies ahead, what's gone before is worth remembering. Here's Robert Bazell.
You get an idea of the pace of our space program in recent years by looking around the Cape. The marsh grass has reclaimed places that much of the world watched in the 1960s and early 70s. Places where Atlas and Redstone, Explorer and Vanguard, Mercury and Gemini began their pioneering journeys into space. But all that stopped in the late 70s. The entire manned space effort has been concentrated in the long-delayed Space Shuttle project. As the shuttle is finally about to take off, it's a good time to recall some of those achievements of the past. It began with dreams, like those of French novelist Jules Verne. His aeronauts rocketed off to the moon and floated back safely. Robert Goddard was the quiet American genius whose primitive rockets revealed the first principles of a new science. Wernher von Braun built rockets for the Nazis. He and his men came to America to become the nucleus of the team assigned to put the first man-made object into orbit. But the Russians did it first. Sputnik went up in October 1957. Embarrassed America tried to catch up with Vanguard. Eventually it succeeded, but there were a lot of spectacular and costly false starts. April 12, 1961, man made his first journey into space. The man was a Russian, Yuri Gagarin. NASA had to pretend to be thrilled at the Soviet achievement. A month later, Americans had something to cheer. Astronaut Alan Shepard made a suborbital flight. A modest 15-minute jaunt, but the American space effort was underway. John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth.
Godspeed, John Glenn. Clock is
Glenn and the other 6 original astronauts became national idols. NASA progressed to the 2-man Gemini program in 1965. On television, we watched men walk in space and perfect the techniques they would need to get to the moon. Apollo, the moon landing program, began in tragedy, however. Astronauts Grissom, White, and Chaffee died in a rehearsal on a Cape launch pad. It was not not until Christmas 1968 that the 3 men of Apollo 8, got their first close-up view of the moon. 7 months later, an age-old dream came true. Men on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Neil Armstrong, the first of 12 men, all Americans, who would leave their imprint on the moon.
I was strolling on the moon one day.
Scientists are still working with the experiments they left, the moon rocks they brought home.
Hey, that's right. Look at the size of that rock.
After Apollo, the emphasis of the space program turned to long-term missions in space. 3 astronaut teams spent weeks inside Skylab, a huge space laboratory. The people who planned the shuttle program hope eventually to construct permanent space stations. If the shuttle had gone up in time, in fact, it might have kept Skylab from falling to Earth. The Russians are also working towards permanent stations. Most of their missions of recent years have involved science in weightless conditions. And of course, far, far in the future, the visionaries say, man will follow his marvelous unmanned vessels to the distant planets and see worlds that even Jules Verne never imagined. And the next step in that journey, according to the dreamers, will be taken by the shuttle.
Robert Bazell, NBC News.
And so we come to this moment a few hours before the Space Shuttle Columbia, known around here as STS-1 for Space Transportation System, is scheduled to lift off the pad. Launch Control announced just a few minutes ago that everything was going normally. The astronauts will be awakened a few minutes after 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time and be given breakfast of orange juice, toast, eggs, and coffee. By 20 minutes to 5 Eastern Time, they will be in their spacesuits aboard Columbia. At 6 o'clock Eastern Time, Tom Brokaw and I will be on the air in this studio. Launch is scheduled for 6:50, and NBC News will cover it all. So until tomorrow morning, good night for NBC News.
Fuel and potentially explosive fumes will be sucked out of the shuttle. An air conditioning unit will be plugged in to get rid of heat buildup during re-entry. A fan will be standing by to blow away poisonous gases. The protective suits of the technicians will have to be washed down. Then finally, the astronauts will emerge to be cheered, no doubt, by the thousands who will come to watch. They will each then undergo physicals. The shuttle itself will be minutely examined, partly refitted, and then flown atop the 747 back to the Cape for the next launch. The desert weather forecast is good for the scheduled landing Sunday and for one earlier should there be trouble. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
If weather conditions or technical problems prevent the space shuttle from setting down in California, an alternate landing site is the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Eric Ingberg is there, just in case.
Historic firsts are not totally new to the White Sands area. 60 miles from where the shuttle landing site is now located is Trinity, a place where the United States set off the first atomic bomb in a test in 1945. All that remains of Ground Zero are the stubby remnants of the tower where the bomb was exploded.
Not far away, a new tower stands, overlooking 2 35,000-foot landing strips and not much else. Northrop Strip is a standby runway for use if the weather is bad in California and for some types of emergency landings, especially on the first orbit. The astronauts who have practiced here often in jet planes would follow visual cues on the runway, a triangular marker and lights on the surface of hard-packed gypsum, which is a sand-like material covering the desert. NASA assigned a bargain basement recovery force to White Sands. It can rescue the astronauts, but not cool or defuel their spacecraft. The technicians here, space-age Bedouins who barely make an imprint on the desert, know they are the bench, not the first team. Does that make it hard to get ready?
I think, like most folks here, we haven't looked at it that way. We assume we're the first team, and if it comes, we're going to do the job.
NASA spent $2 million here, all on insurance. The crash teams, recovery teams, photo teams will be ready, but know that if all goes well, they won't be needed. Eric Ingberg, CBS News, Northrop Strip, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico.
In addition to California, New Mexico, and the Kennedy Space Center itself, 3 other landing sites have been designated as necessary for landing in case of a premature deorbit. In the Ryukyu Islands of Japan, in Rota, Spain, and at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Our report from Florida will resume in a minute.
There's one German word more and more Americans are picking up. Beck's. Beck's. The #1 imported German beer.
If you're not rich enough for a high-price lawyer and not poor enough for legal aid, try Jacoby & Myers. It's about time. Now at TSS stores and other convenient locations.
This luscious strawberry contains nothing artificial, just like Breyer's ice cream. Breyer's, the all-natural ice cream since 1866.
Who says you can't afford genuine leather shoes? Well, right now at Father & Son at Endicott Johnson, you can buy 2 pair of leather shoes for only $39.90. That's right, $39.90. And these leather shoes feature cushion insoles and lifetime soles and heels that will outwear the uppers, or we'll replace them free. At these prices, you'll want several pair of these genuine leather shoes with lifetime soles and heels. On sale at Father & Son and Endicott Johnson today.
The cost of the shuttle program has caused considerable debate. In 1971, the Space Agency estimated it would cost just more than $5 billion to develop and test the shuttle. But cost overruns and inflation now have almost doubled that estimate. After this flight, 3 more shuttle test flights are planned. Then the Space Agency hopes to put the shuttle to work. Its chores include putting into orbit and servicing all manner of satellites, including military ones. In 1983, the shuttle is scheduled to put a space laboratory into orbit. More on that from Steve Young.
Space Lab will resume the work pioneered by America's first Earth-orbiting space station, Skylab.
We have roughly 40 experiments covering a number of disciplines: astronomy, life sciences, material sciences, and if you count all the variations of these experiments, you can get up to close to 80.
Specialists who go up on early Space Lab missions will have to return with the laboratory after only 7 working days in space, compared with Skylab missions that ran up to 3 months.
So it's a frustration. I like to compare it to the camper mode of doing things. We're sort of going out and staying in a camper rather than going off to a factory to work.
The Space Agency expects that by 1985, Shuttle will take the Space Telescope into orbit. It should be able to see 7 times farther than telescopes on Earth. To the distance light travels in 14 billion years, perhaps the very edge of the universe and the beginning of time. One of Shuttle's selling points was that Space Lab could help demonstrate manufacturing procedures impossible on Earth and make them cheap enough for industry to exploit. McDonnell Douglas Corporation and a division of Johnson & Johnson hope by 1987 to have an automated factory in space 500 times more efficient than Earthbound versions, producing rare serums for the treatment of human disease at an enormous profit.
For a reasonable size market in one of these particular products, you're probably talking it could be better than $100 million annually in sales.
Most corporations are more cautious about industry's future in space.
You've got to figure out, what is the risk, what is the front-end investment, what are the operating costs, and that sort of thing. And there just isn't enough information right now to answer those questions.
Further down the road, NASA envisions far-out concepts made possible by a machine called a beam builder. A prototype exists right now. Carried up by the shuttle, the beam builder could manufacture girders needed for huge structures. Since space has no gravity, the beams wouldn't have to be strong enough to avoid collapsing under their own weight. A vast latticework of beams could support giant antennas, making wrist radio communication with satellites possible. 50-square-mile solar power stations could each send to Earth as much energy as 10 nuclear power plants. The Space Agency is convinced that Shuttle will make it possible to achieve such visionary schemes, ideas which seemed like science fiction a few years ago.
They are certainly things that could be, and I believe they're things that will be. The only question that I think that I have is who will do it? In the not-too-distant future, there will be continuous habitation in space and useful things being done in space to the benefit of all of us here on Earth.
If Shuttle is successful, NASA believes it could change space from an exclusive club for astronauts to to a place where thousands of people live and work. Steve Young, CBS News at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama.
We'll be back in a minute to talk with some experts on the shuttle program.
You see what Polaroid gave me? Their new made-for-each-other pack. The Time Zero one-step and Time Zero super color film. You get the world's fastest developing color.
Make a great birthday gift.
Birthdays, weddings, graduations, you can't find a nicer present. And when they say all that color and how fast they get it, they'll think it costs more than it did.
They sure will.
What are you doing?
Wrapping Ricky's birthday present.
But that was for me.
You just said it makes a great gift.
Never mind what I said.
Made for each other.
Yes, New York, I think we had that information coming in.
These busy executives in 3 different cities are all at the same conference, a teleconference. They solve their problems without leaving the office through the Bell Network, the world's most advanced information management system. That reduces travel, cuts costs, gets more done. You are also part of the network. Use it. Put our knowledge to work for you. The Information Management Network from Bell.
With me tonight here at the Kennedy Space Center are 2 men who are experts on space and whose advice we'll be getting throughout our coverage. Alan Bean, who walked on the moon in 1969 as part of Apollo 12, and our old friend Leo Krupp, the Rockwell research pilot for the shuttle, and before that for Apollo. Gentlemen, I know you think this is going to work. You're optimistic about it. But when you worry, Al Bean, what is your number 1 worry?
Well, I guess my number 1 worry would be something we haven't thought of yet, Dan. Everything we've thought of, we think we've got engineers smart enough to figure out what to do. Now, is there anything on the solid rockets or external tank or orbiter itself that we haven't thought of? Well, we don't think there is, but we're going to find out in the next few days.
Leo Krupp, what's your number 1 worry?
Well, I feel like Al, we've tried to program everything we could think of. We've looked at all the possible failures that could happen, and we've had workarounds for them. And but from a pilot standpoint, I guess my major concern would be the ascent, because that is the period of the flight when the pilot is time critical on everything that happens, and he doesn't have time to get help from the ground. Now, if we have a problem after we get into orbit, we have experts in Houston and Rockwell and all the other contractors who will support the crew, analyze the problem, provide them a workaround in the simulators, and come up with a solution for them. But if something happens on ascent, the pilots must react very rapidly and correctly.
Why do it? If it works, if everything goes reasonably well, the spaceship gets back, the astronauts get back, to what end?
Well, Dan, it's been 6 years since we've had a man in space, and the Russians have been up there frequently, and they've been completing all of their objectives, many of which we can anticipate are military objectives. And for this country to maintain its national security as well as progressing our technology, I think it's essential that we keep progressing in space, in manned space.
Al Bean, why do it?
Why do it? Well, if you believe the world's a better place than it was 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, I personally do, you have to ask yourself why. Mostly it's because technology is better. We can make people live longer, we can give them happier lives and everything else. Space shuttle is just one thing that improves technology, improves the progress of man. I think that it'll be a better world in the future, and I think one of the reasons is space shuttle's around and it's going to move things forward.
Very quickly, Leo Krupp, are the Soviets correct when they say that we're doing this mostly for military purposes?
No, not at all, Dan. This is going to be a working vehicle. It's going to become the DC-3 of the space age, and it's going to be completely in Earth orbit. And we're going to get a lot of technology, a lot of manufacturing, medical benefits out of this program. It's going to be a working tool for the country. It will have some military applications, which we must realize, and they're very important. But it's going to be the working tool of the space, and it's just like aviation started. No one could imagine what aviation was going to evolve in back before World War I, and no one can imagine what the space shuttle and the space endeavor is going to evolve into.
Al Bean, do you wish you were going?
Yeah, I wish I were going, and I think everybody in our office, we got about 82 astronauts now, and I think every one of them wish they could trade places with either John Young or Bob Trippin.
We only have a few seconds left. They're going to be frightened up there in the morning, are they not?
I don't think so, but they're going to be anxious and alert and ready to do. I think you're never afraid for your life. You always want to say to yourself, do I know what to do if anything goes wrong? Am I fully prepared? And I think John and Kripp have said several times that they are and they're ready. We're all confident. We're real happy that tomorrow's finally got here.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and we look forward to working with you in the morning. So all is in readiness tonight for the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia, and the countdown at last report was proceeding smoothly toward America's new space venture. CBS News coverage of the liftoff will begin at 6:30 Eastern Time in the morning. Until then, Dan Rather, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center. Good night.